let's pivot to basically our first like fantasy booking main topic of the show. Um let's talk about basically staying on this topic in terms of booking. It's basically been the motif over the last couple of weeks. Um what have been the pros and what are the pros and cons of a WWE style? What's good, Jabari? What's good? What is what could be the pros and cons of WWE's booking style?
All
You
right.
know,
Well, how would you say? Like what are some pros that come to your mind?
I mean, the pros is obviously the way they tell stories, because back then the wrestling didn't match the way the storylines were portrayed on TV because certain matches were kind of like the way it was. I do think the match styles caught up, especially over the last 10 to 15 years. Um, it's just more so now where the storylines and the pacing and where you place characters on the card has been an issue, especially on the main roster. And it's like this is Trips going on, well, second full year, but he's going on primarily 3 years, 2.5, 3 years as the head of the creative in WWE. And I just expected, I just expected better from him because of what you see from NXT. But even then, you saw the issues in NXT as well in terms of his pacing and booking.
Well, let's put it all on the table then. Like
Cool.
let's talk about a few things. One, WWE, the main roster and all the responsibilities and um all the different responsibilities that come with being on the main roster are to a higher degree than NXT. NXT is a more controlled environment. Triple H is more like he probably would have felt more comfortable in that environment because he had less factors to deal with that were affecting his product outside of maybe Vince going after him in terms of taking talent and whatnot, which I think is what did affect a lot of those pacing issues in NXT. I will say on the main roster, you're thinking about sponsors, you're thinking about all these different events, all these different charities, basically all these different companies and whatnot you have to work with. What networks want? What does Netflix want? What does USA want? What does CW want? I do understand why it's not always as direct and clear cut as we'd like it to be. But I will say again, a lot of what pushes those factors into gear, I feel, starts from that creative room. Like you have the stories that kind of push the narrative and kind of make people want to take part in what you're doing, depending on if you can get them to get over or not. The best way to describe Triple H's booking to me is that I don't think it's that fundamentally different from Vince. I think that Vince was more haphazard with how he was doing things because he would have a lot of stop and starts, but a lot of the mentalities are kind of the same to me. What are the top stars doing? What can we do with them? They're the main priority. And then everything else is kind of just we're figuring it out and we can make certain things out of other things. Some people will get some big moments, but a lot of these things don't kind of, what do you call it? They don't always pan out the way that they should. And that kind of reminds me of Vince. I feel like Vince goes at a faster pace with it, whereas Triple H goes at a slower pace with it. But a lot of the fundamentals are still the same. Like I think the biggest the biggest pro so far has been the presentation of stories, the presentation of the talent, the presentation of matches and whatnot. Like a lot of that has increased. Like for example, what was it? That match with Drew McIntyre and CM Punk where they were doing the four corners. It kind of looked like a cowbell match or a strap match in a sense. Like that fundamentally looked a lot better than most of the ones we've seen in recent WWE history. The way that people come out to their entrances, the fact that the camera's following them from the gorilla position, from backstage through the kiosk areas, and like a lot of that stuff has been done really well. And Lord knows most people care about aesthetics and looks sometimes over the substance of things. So they're hitting the nail on a lot of the things that people will immediately gravitate towards. So I think Triple H has done pretty well with that. I think another pro that I could personally think of with Triple H's booking is that he does let certain storylines sit for a while. Like he does let them marinate to some degree. I think the extent that he has them cooking is a little too long personally. Like there should be more room for like certain stories don't have to be dragged out. For example, like Rhea Ripley and Liv Morgan didn't have to go the way that it did, right? But at least there's room for storylines to kind of grow. Like you have to find that balance there. So I'll give him presentation and obviously the long-term booking thing for the most part as a pro. I think the biggest cons is just to your point, the pacing of things and the fact that like there's certain mistakes that shouldn't have happened. Like for example, one thing Triple H got praised for a while was having a lot of stuff in the background. Like you'd be focusing on a main segment and there'd be another storyline happening in the back. If you look behind the wrestlers that you're supposed to be focusing on, you'd see like Nikki Bella doing something, or you see Drew and Rhea talking or something to that effect. And sometimes it'd be addressed later on, and other times we'd just forget about it. You know? So like I think that stuff like that, like he has to get a lot more of his ducks in a row in terms of like getting a more concrete plan for we've talked about it for weeks. What are the other stories that matter? How do we make those matter as well? How do we get those to a certain point where people are coming into pay-per-views wanting to watch the entire card and not just two matches? You know what I
Like,
mean?
what would be an example of a story that you think that we can basically give more of a highlight to, or you feel like we can basically give more of our investment into, so that fans can be like, all right, this is something that other than the major stories that we're watching that we're enjoying, that we can just sit back and just enjoy this aspect of it. Like, which storylines you think that are capable of that?
Well, one that hasn't really been spoken about for a while was Chad Gable's pursuit of gold. I think that overarching storyline of just Chad finally being able to act on his potential. I would have liked to have seen a better comeuppance for that. Obviously, the Intercontinental Championship arc of that story ended some time ago, and Chad has kind of just been doing whatever since then. But the idea of him had he gone to SmackDown and won the U.S. Championship, I think that would have been a good supplement for that story. Him finally winning gold on a level he deserves, and it's a belt that's more made for him than the Intercontinental title was. If it had come down to Chad Gable being the guy to beat Braun Breaker, that would have been an interesting story as well. Or had Chad Gable just bypassed the IC belt and gone for the World Heavyweight title, that would have been interesting too. So that would have been a story I would have liked to have seen. Also, keeping on Gable, the Otis, Alpha Academy thing was abruptly ended. Like there were still legs with that story. The idea that Otis and Maxine and Tozawa separated from Gable and they fought for a while, but the match I think they did have a match, Gable and Chad and Otis, but it didn't feel like the finale that feud deserved, considering how big the audience was getting behind Otis. Considering how what do you call it? They had added I almost said American Alpha. That is a whole different era of Chad. But when they added the Creed brothers and Ivy Nile, like it felt like there was more on the plate there, and it kind of sucks that like Otis and Tozawa, didn't get to run as a team a little bit longer. I know Tozawa had that one head bump that was really scary, but since then they've been healthy. They could have been a force in the tag division for a little bit as well. That could have been their payoff from that as well. The feud with the Creeds and the different types of match dynamics we could have got from that. So for me, I feel like a lot of Chad stuff from early last year kind of went to the wayside. Um, I'd say another story that could have gotten a different highlight would have been the entire Judgment Day. I think had that had been paced better and we would have gotten their ending a little bit earlier, maybe that could have been a highlight where we would have been in a whole different sphere right now where Finn Balor is. Damian Priest may have gotten a few months earlier of a run of momentum that would have helped him right now, to where even when he's not exactly doing something on his level right now, he would have still felt as credible as he should have. Rhea could have gotten some good character development from that as well, as opposed to just having Rhea and Damian just job out the Judgment Day, which has been an issue. I think Dominic could have gotten something as well, because a lot of the Judgment Day just shifted between Finn trying to be leader and Liv being a part of it in the first place. Love Carlito stuff though. That stuff a lot of that could have been better managed. I think another story they could have done this with. Theory and Waller, the will they won't they breaking up of Theory and Waller. Where did Shinsuke come from? I still haven't gotten an answer for that. Like, what caused Shinsuke to have this type of change within him? You know, he's kind of a semi factor now, but what was caused? I'm sorry, I'm rambling so
No,
long,
no,
folks. But like,
no. Continue,
these are just
continue.
some of the things that came to mind. It's like, what is happening in these types of stories? Because we saw Waller in Theory facing Obafemi, and Obafemi just needed something to do, so he just, took out a team. But like, what's going on with that? What's going on with what's going on with a lot of the mid card of SmackDown? To be quite honest, like, people are complaining about how hard it is to watch 3 hour SmackDowns, and part of it is because we don't even know what to do. If it's not the women's title, the world championship, or the bloodline, what are we really doing during that period? So, no, actually, no, Tag Division's doing some storyline stuff. That's my apologies. No, they are doing something, but you get the idea. Like, I would say some of those storylines.
But the fact that you had to even mention that in that light is a
Yeah,
problem.
I think we covered the two of the big bullet points so far. Just like the contrast in styles and those pros and cons. Honestly, I don't know why it's not being brought more to the attention of people. You know what I mean? Like,
I know why.
Why would you say?
I think it's because, like, on the surface, like, aesthetically, because they're doing well aesthetically so well right now in terms of their popularity, it's basically hiding everything, that basically needs to be done or basically needs to be tweaked a little bit. But however, it's noticeable enough for you to see like exactly what's wrong. Like, even now with this week, the fact that I think it was Fightful or another outlet that talked about like the women being frustrated, in terms of their booking and their creative, decision process. And it's like, it's crazy because before we even got to this episode, we talked about this 2 episodes prior in terms of what was going on.
Yeah.
So it kind of does tie in terms of what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks in terms of like Trips either booking himself into a corner or holding on to certain stories too long or not prioritizing certain things while in that pocket would be more feasible, especially to fans.
Yeah, it sucks because like a lot of that creative dysfunction makes you wonder what really matters anymore outside of the prioritized stuff. Because I'll put it to you this way: we've talked about it in different ways for the past year. Like, what pay-per-views really matter? You have about 12 of them a year. 12 of them. Then you have the Saturday Night's Main Event specials and everything. What really matters outside of maybe 3 of them? SummerSlam, the Rumble, and WrestleMania, right? So everything else is kind of just like a means to an end, and you feel it when you watch these cards because the cards are short, which is fine, helps on time, but like the cards are short and you get a lot of predictable finishes that feel like they could have just been Raw main events or SmackDown main events. And you sit there and you go, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those type of main events can be great, but like when you see how much is not put into those shows, you go, what's going on? You see the WWE is expanding their content, right? We have LFG now, WWE Evolve. I know NXT Level Up was a thing for quite a while to build NXT, and everyone's excited because it's like, oh, they're giving opportunities to all these people, and it's like, well, I can take you back a few years ago when we had 2 brands of NXT with just NXT and NXT UK, and it's hard to make that crossover of talent when most people are only watching a certain amount of things. I know we're in a content era, but let's be honest, how many people were watching NXT UK alongside the other shows? How many of those talents were doing well when they converted over to the other shows? Like, for example,
Only a couple, like
only a handful, right? Like, I'm happy. I love people like Charlie Dempsey and a lot of the UK talents, but a lot of them had to make some weird transitions over to the show where, like, you could see if they weren't exposed to certain factors, they wouldn't be allowed to swim well. Like, what do you call it? The storyline with Charlie Dempsey and what's her name from the NWA? God, I'm forgetting her name off the top of my head. but they had to put those two together for them to kind of to swim well on the show. Not to say that Charlie was doing bad before, but to kind of give more personality to Charlie's character so people could stay interested alongside the quarter catch crew. You had someone like Axiom. Axiom was a kid in NXT UK, and they did not allow a kid to work very well when he switched over during NXT 2.0. So he had to become a mass wrestler and have this program basically with Nathan Frazier in order to really, really have the foothold he has in NXT right now, right? You realize that a lot of the talents that are going to be pushed going forward, some of them might not even be fully ready for the responsibilities they're about to get, right? Like, for example, some of the top talents in the company right now are just the most over people. And by wrestling fans' logic, if you're over, you should be getting certain spots. And I get that. But some people are over and they might not necessarily be ready for that opportunity right now. Or if they do get the opportunity, they could fizzle out really quickly. Like, for example, I love Trick Williams,
He's not
but
ready.
if Trick Williams were to be pushed to the top of even being pushed to the top of NXT, he has issues sometimes with his performances to where like it's not so much that he can't be there, it's just he needs a little bit more refining to fully be comfortable there. And sometimes you have to, give somebody a push even when it's a little early. But in the case of Trick, it's like he had 2 NXT championship runs, I'm pretty sure, right? And we're still saying that he should continue to refine himself there, or he should find storylines that'll help build him up more so that he can properly be in that top spot, whether it's in NXT or the main roster of WWE. So you're sitting there and you realize a lot of stars that we do like are going to get pushed over a lot of stars that may be more deserving right now or have been grinding for a while. Like, for example, I love the Metaphor Girls, and I think they're great as a tag team. But I know that at some point, because of how big of a star Lash Legend comes across in terms of her aesthetic and her appearance and her presence, they're going to want her to be on her own at some point, right? And they might prematurely rush that and have her be on her own, and she's going to be getting pushed over people like Zelina Vega. She's going to be getting pushed over people like Michin. She's going to be getting pushed over people like Kairi Sane. She's going to be getting pushed over some people who've been there and have been grinding for a while and probably deserve that opportunity because of all the years they put in, and they've been waiting their turn, and someone else is going to jump up because look at what NXT is pumping out. A lot of the women are gorgeous. A lot of them are very talented in the spurts that they are in the ring, in their character. They're younger. It's hard to watch a lot of like. I'll put it to you this way. Let's say you watch LFG or you watch WWE Evolve and you develop a connection with a talent. If that talent doesn't fit a certain mold right now, there's a good chance that they'll be snubbed aside for someone who's just a bit more aesthetically pleasing, a bit more on the presentation aspect. And then you bring them to the main roster and realize a lot of those other talents that are there, like a Cedric Alexander that was there, or a Fabian Eichner, and a lot of these other guys are just good hands. They're going to be treated as just good hands. And the ones that may not even be ready for these spots are going to immediately get these opportunities, or they're going to be worked on as pet projects. And it's just a little bit disheartening, And when you combine that with the main landscape, you're kind of just sitting there like, what do I really have? What am I really going to be excited for if I already know how everything's going to go? Like, does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. But all right. So now that we know that those are the issues, how I'm not sure if I should answer that now or like towards the end of the show. I guess we can talk about the solutions later. But there has to be solutions, easy fixes to what is like basically hampering WWE right now. Because it's like your popularity is at its highest. Sure, like things are going great, but things could be better. Not everything's perfect, and that's with any wrestling company. Like as good as AEW is starting to get on the good foot right now with certain things that they're doing well, it's not a perfect thing. Even with
No.
TNA, so like nothing is perfect. As good as NXT has been, there's still the glaring issue is the popularity of the men because the women are basically dominating the show. Now I'm more happy about the fact that the women are dominating and putting their foothold on the show, but at the end of the day, if you're gonna basically have the next big face from a male's perspective in WWE, they have to basically show up and do what they have to do on the men's perspective, on the men's side in NXT. So I think there has to be something, to be done, or like certain solutions that could definitely help and alleviate a lot of those pressures on both sides. Because if you help by not doing what you said before, like pushing, the Metaphor girls onto the main roster, or Trick Williams, obviously moving forward, I think it's going to do them a disservice. And I love Trick, and I have a lot of love for the Metaphor girls, but I just believe that if you're able to basically do that now, you're rushing a good thing. I need them to season themselves a little more in NXT. I think they do need that, over time. Like, I do think they need more of that. Not saying that they're not ready, but because of the way the main roster is so stacked right now, you don't, like you said before, you don't want to necessarily prioritize them over other stars that they're trying to put on, especially in the mid card. If you have enough, you have to basically find a good rotation of people that you trust, like from the mid card scene, to contend for the mid card titles and or tag team titles. There's a lot that's positive, but there's a lot of things that they really do need to do better at. They can't just rely on, we got these great big stories, but someone's going to be left out. And I get it. It's only so much TV time that you have, but
more people can eat at that table than you think.
Boy,
that's what I feel like. I feel like a lot of fans don't want to have a real long, nuanced conversation about it, because wrestling's never really been portrayed in a nuanced way. It's always been portrayed in a simplistic way. So we're having quick conversations. We're getting our emotions off really quickly. And if we don't like something, we might go in depth if it's something that we're really passionate about. But for the most part, people don't want to talk about all the issues that way. And I get it. But here's the thing. I think that as fans, it's up to us to have more of those conversations, because we can't sit here and keep it simple. And then when we watch a pay-per-view card, go, man, this shit boring. I'm only here for really one thing or two things. Why is nothing else really catching my eye? And it's because we're not doing, because like one of the biggest conversations people have had is, whose fault really is it? Is it the fans or the creative? And the answer is pretty simple. It's a bit of both. It's more on the creative end, because they're the ones that are making the stories, but the fans have to, like, you have to work in harmony. Like, for example, let's use a Trick Williams, because I do like Trick. He's a very over person. And a lot of people are going to want him at the top because of how hot he would be in terms of his momentum. Mm-hmm. Now, as the creative, you have to recognize, because you work with the talent more directly than the fans do, Trick is over. But we need to, and this is for anybody, not just Trick. Let's say hypothetically someone with Trick's momentum. He's over, but he's still learning. So we need to steady that momentum a certain way. That's one of the reasons why a few weeks ago I brought up Jey Uso and how I thought the IC belt would have made more sense for him in the long run than the world title did. Not because he isn't deserving of it, but more so because if you want to put somebody in a position, you should give them the best cushion to do so possible. And if you've already proven yourself to be good with a championship before, which is half the reason why those mid-card belts exist, then you got to go down that journey and make things work. Now, some people skip that process. I get it. But a lot of times the people who skip that process are the ones that can make that jump feasibly, or they can learn quicker than others. And now you have a conversation of incompetence and this and that, but that's not really what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that for some people, some journeys are smoother than others. And just because somebody else gets a jump early doesn't mean that you necessarily have to. How long did it take Daniel Bryan to get over the way that he did? Took about, by the time he became WWE champion, it took about 2 years.
Yeah, about 2 years.
And that's because he found a catchphrase that worked, that let him emphasize his arrogance more when he was a heel back in 2012. And then he became a delusional babyface in 2013, and he became a admirable, more endearing babyface by 2014. Right? A lot of that worked to Bryan's advantage. A lot of that worked in a way where it took time to do that. And he had multiple world title runs in between. Well, he had a couple different title runs in between. But by the time he got there, it wasn't like he wasn't ready to take on the world championship. but he found a perfect harmony of character and wrestling by that point to where there was no question about it, right? And you want to do that with a lot more wrestlers. Like, for example, in the case of Trick, it's usually an in-ring thing with him. Like, he has a lot of cool, flashy moves, but the footwork and his coherence and a lot of things he would get better at with experience should be the things that they focus on with him. So by the time that he is more confident in what he's doing than he already is, he'd botch less. He'd be in better positions less. He'd have more wherewithal, and he would be way more ready for that title opportunity than say he did when he was just hot. You know, at that point he would be over and ready, and that's what you want more for. But because WWE is so big on presentation and so big on, you know, stars being a certain way right away, like, I have fears about that. I have fears that certain people are going to get pushed too early. The standard and quality of what we're watching is going to go down just to accommodate the fact that someone is hot with the crowd. Somebody can be hot with the crowd, but they have to be hot with the crowd and be ready to take on every responsibility that comes to them. And sometimes you do have to, sometimes you do just get fed to the wolves. But if you can reduce that, if you can reduce the chances of that happening as much as you can and do things more properly, then you should. That's just kind of how I feel about it.
Okay, pretty good, pretty good.